The fire was already too big. Flames tore through the old farmhouse like it owed them something. Smoke punched the sky, turning the afternoon into a choking dusk. Sirens screamed, but not louder than the howling that came from inside. Then suddenly, he appeared. A German shepherd, blackened with soot, eyes wild, limping through the smoke. His fur was scorched, patches missing, ribs showing. But he didn't collapse. He didn't run. He turned around and bolted straight back into the flames. They tried to stop him. One firefighter, Matt, lunged forward, grabbing at the collar barely hanging from the dog's neck. The shepherd growled, not in anger, but in desperation. He sank his teeth into Matt's glove, dragging, pleading, trembling with purpose. Something was inside. No one believed it. The place was condemned. No utilities, no squatters, no life. Just a forgotten property the town never cared to bulldoze. But the dog didn't care about logic. He yanked, clawed, twisted free, and vanished again into the inferno. Then came the sound. Not barking, not whining, wailing, like mourning, like something remembering too much. Minutes later, he stumbled back out. Burned worse now, blood on his paw, tongue out, barely breathing, and something in his mouth. He limped right up to Matt and dropped it at his boots. A child's shoe, half melted, tiny, pink. The wind shifted. The fire cracked louder. No one spoke. Matt knelt, staring at the shoe. Something turned in his chest. He reached out slowly, gently petting the side of the dog's neck. The shepherd didn't move. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the house as if it still held something sacred. Or someone. The chief called for sedation. The dog had to be taken in. But even as they loaded him onto the stretcher, even through the heavy drugs, his eyes never left the house. He growled weakly, like he was trying to warn them. That night, Matt couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the dog's face in his mind. Scorched, scarred, stubborn. The kind of face that doesn't run from fire unless it's trying to save something it can't live without. He opened the bag he wasn't supposed to keep. Inside, the shoe, charred on one side, lace melted to plastic. Inside it, tucked in the heel like a secret, was something he hadn't seen at the site. A locket, gold, burned around the edges. He cracked it open. Inside, a photo. A little girl, blonde, maybe 6, and right beside her, clear as day, the same German shepherd, healthy, strong, tongue out, eyes bright. His chest tightened. He flipped the photo over. One word. Lily. He didn't know who Lily was, but he knew one thing. That dog had gone into the fire 3 times for her. Not because he was hurt, not because he was lost, because she was still in there, and he was trying to bring her back. If this story is gripping your heart right now, take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts. Keep stories like this alive, and someone out there needs to hear this one. The next morning, before sunrise, Matt drove out to the ruins alone. No gear, no backup. The air still smelled like regret. The house was now a skeleton of beams and ash. But as he stood there, motionless, he heard something. Scratching. Not from the trees. Not from the wind. From beneath the ground. Matt didn't tell anyone he was returning to the ruins. He told himself it was nothing. Just echoes, animal noise. But the sound, the scratching, it didn't leave his head. Came from below. From the place the fire never touched. Ash crunched under his boots as he moved through what used to be a hallway. The floor had collapsed near the center, exposing a pit of blackened debris. But the smell wasn't just smoke anymore. It was damp earth, mold, something old and buried. He crouched low, listened. Nothing. Then again scratch. Soft, deliberate. He stepped back, looked around for tools, found a rusted metal rod under collapsed siding, jammed it into the ash and began to dig. Every scrape unearthed another piece of silence. Nails, charred wood, shattered glass, then something different, softer. Dirt, real dirt, beneath the ash, packed down, disturbed. He dug faster. Back at the animal shelter, the German shepherd had broken through the metal cage door. left deep claw marks along the tile floor, smashed his snout trying to get out. Sedation barely slowed him down. They didn't understand. He wasn't running. He was returning. Returning to where he failed. Matt reached something solid. Not rock. Not wood. He cleared it with his hands. Concrete hatch. Square. Bolted shut. The metal around the edges was warm. Not from the sun. From something else. He ran his fingers along the seam. Found a latch. Pulled. It didn't budge. Back at the shelter, the dog was howling. Loud. Low. Long. As if calling through time. As if he knew. Matt took the rod again. Jammed it under the corner. Leveraged his weight. The hatch groaned. Then moved. Air rushed out like a breath held for years. It smelled like rot. Like breath without lungs. He backed up. Coughing. Eyes burning. Then he climbed down. The steps were narrow. Made of stone. Slick with moisture. A single light bulb hung by a wire. Swinging slightly. Though there was no wind. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam landed on drawings. Childlike. Crayon. Stick figures. Sunshines. A girl holding hands with a dog. Same dog. Smiling. Page after page taped to the wall. Then the drawings changed. Bars appeared in front of the figures. Tears. Storm clouds. Blood-red lines. The floor was covered in toys. Old ones. Rusted. Broken. Covered in ash. A tricycle missing a wheel. A pink plastic tea set. Cups melted together. In the corner, something shimmered. A chain. Bolted into the concrete. Still warm to the touch. He turned around quickly, his breath catching. Scratches. Dozens. Along the back wall. Carved into the stone with fingernails. Words. Help me. And below it, a name. Lily. The flashlight flickered. He tapped it. It steadied. But the air had shifted. Felt watched. At the shelter, the dog broke free. Slipped past the distracted staff. Busted through the gate. Bloodied paws didn't stop him. He ran full speed toward the smoke. Toward the truth. Matt climbed out of the hatch in silence. No words. No conclusions. Just wait. He sat in his truck for an hour before driving back. That night, he took out the locket again. Ran his fingers over the girl's face. Same girl as the drawings. The dog was right. She was real. And no one had listened. He searched her name. Dozens of articles. All old. All the same story. Lily Miles. Age 6. Disappeared 7 years ago. Last seen near this very farmhouse. Suspect. Her uncle Darren Miles. Convicted. Died in prison. Maintained his innocence until his final breath. No body ever found. No evidence ever found. Until now. Matt printed the photo. Folded it. Put it in his pocket. He was going back. But this time he wouldn't go alone. He drove to the woods and waited. Hours passed. No sign of the dog. Then, just before dawn, something rustled through the brush. He turned. There he was. The German shepherd. Burned. Bleeding. Eyes full of fire. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just walked past Matt. Back toward the house and began to dig. If this story is opening something in you, don't scroll. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us what you'd do if you were standing in those ashes. Your comment might mean more than you think. Matt followed. No flashlight this time. No plan. Just the dog. And the truth. The ground gave way beneath them both. They didn't fall into darkness. They fell into memory. They landed hard. Dust exploded around them, and Matt's ribs screamed. He pushed himself up, coughing, reaching for the dog. The shepherd was already on his feet, pacing in tight, frantic circles, nose to the dirt, tail stiff. He wasn't panicked. He was searching. The hole they'd fallen through wasn't natural. The floor had been deliberately weakened. Matt could see it now, old wood layered thin over loose soil, just enough to collapse under weight. A trap not meant to kill, just to conceal. He scanned the space. They were in another basement, different from the hatch. This one was wider, darker, and smelled worse. No light bulb, just the thin slice of dawn seeping through the broken floor above. The dog growled low. not at Matt. Something ahead. Matt followed his gaze. Pile of bones. Small ones. Scattered. Animal, probably. But next to them, something else. A charred photograph. Curled at the edges. Matt picked it up gently. It was melted into itself, half burned. But the image remained. A little girl smiling beside a German shepherd. Same face. Same eyes. Same dog. Her arm wrapped around his neck like she trusted him with her entire world. Matt's breath caught. He turned the photo over. The back was scorched, but part of a signature remained. Love, Lily. The weight of it almost knocked him down. Behind him, the dog began digging again. Not wildly, but with precision. Like he remembered exactly where to go. Dust rose in clouds as his paws struck something solid. Matt helped. Together, they uncovered a wooden crate, sealed with nails and bound in rusted wire. He pried it open with a brick. Inside, stuffed animals, tiny clothes, a broken watch, all children's things, preserved, hidden, memorized. But there was something else. A journal, bound in leather, brittle with age. He opened it. The first page read, "If anyone finds this, my name is Lily. I don't know how long I've been here." Matt's hands shook. He read faster. Page after page of a child trying to survive. Describing the dog. "He finds food for me. He never leaves. I think he's an angel." Matt closed the book. He looked at the dog, who had stopped digging, who now just stared at him with quiet, waiting eyes, as if asking, "Do you believe me now?" He did. Back in town, Matt tried to talk to his chief. He brought the locket, the photo, the journal, but the chief shut the door before he finished. "That case is closed, Matt. Don't dig up ghosts." It was the same story from everyone. Locals avoided the ruins, told old tales of curses, of a girl who vanished because she was troubled, not taken. They wanted the past to stay buried. But Matt wasn't letting go. He drove to the town records office, pulled files, property maps, ownership histories. That house had passed through multiple hands, but one name kept popping up. Same man on Lily's missing persons report, Darren Miles. But it didn't add up. His file said he was arrested 2 days after the girl vanished. No trial, no search of the house, just a conviction. Matt flipped through court transcripts. No mention of the dog. No mention of the hatch. No mention of a basement. It was like no one ever looked. He returned to the ruins again, this time with gloves, gear, and a camera. He filmed everything. The journal, the photo, the chain marks on the walls. And most of all, the dog sitting calmly in the ash, tail wrapped around his paws, eyes never blinking. He posted the footage anonymously. No commentary, no explanation, just truth. It spread like wildfire. Thousands of shares. People demanding answers. Former neighbors coming forward. One woman said she remembered the dog. He used to sit by the house for days, howling. Another said she heard screams one night, but was told it was foxes. Matt wasn't alone anymore. The fire had burned the house, but now it was burning the silence. He returned home late that night, exhausted. He dropped his gear, slumped to the floor. The dog curled beside him without a word. But just before sleep came, the dog perked up, ears raised, head turned. Matt sat up, heart racing. Through the window in the woods across the road, a shadow moved, then disappeared. Someone was watching. Someone who knew the dog wasn't supposed to survive. Matt stood frozen by the window, staring into the woods. The shape was gone, but the feeling remained. Someone had been there, watching, waiting, not just curious, threatened. The dog stood beside him, growling low, his gaze locked on the trees. It wasn't just instinct. It was memory. He recognized something. Matt locked the door, checked the windows, and turned off every light in the house. The air thickened. He knew he was in danger, but not from what lived in the shadows. He was close to something that was never supposed to surface. The next morning, he didn't go to the station. He didn't report the sighting. He drove back to the hatch, back into the cellar. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the light inside came from a different place now. Fear lit the path. He retraced every step, every crayon drawing on the walls, every chain mark. But something was different. One of the drawings was missing. He remembered it, Lily and the dog under a tree. It had been taped near the corner. Now only a torn scrap remained. Someone had been here. The dog whined, pacing back and forth, nose in the air, tail rigid. Matt followed his lead through the back of the cellar, past a rotten couch and shelves of dusty jars, until he found it. A second door. Metal. Bolted. Hidden behind an old mattress. He pressed his ear against it. Silence. Then a soft sound. Scratching. He grabbed a rusted wrench and pried the latch free. The door creaked open. The darkness behind it was thick enough to swallow breath. The dog pushed past him, nose to the ground, body tense. Matt stepped in behind him, flashlight flickering against mold-covered walls. The air was colder here, older. Then the beam caught something. A mattress. Thin. Worn. Covered in children's blankets. And someone on it. A girl. She flinched at the light, curling into herself. Dirt smeared across her face. Her arms bruised. Her hair long, matted, but unmistakably blonde. Lily. Matt froze. Time fractured. His throat tightened, and for a second he couldn't move. The dog stepped forward, whimpering. Lily's eyes widened. She gasped. Her fingers reached forward, trembling. She knew him. The dog rushed into her arms, and she collapsed around him, sobbing into his neck. Not out of fear, out of recognition. She hadn't forgotten. Neither had he. Matt knelt slowly. He didn't speak, just watched them. The way she clung to the dog like he'd carried her heart through hell. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. Matt helped her up gently. She limped, weak, barely able to hold her weight. He wrapped her in his jacket, held her steady as they made their way back through the cellar, out into the morning light that barely dared to break through the trees. They reached his truck, and for a moment, it felt like a victory, until he looked up. Across the field, just beyond the clearing, stood a man. Old coat, hood pulled low, still, watching. Matt stepped forward instinctively, but the man turned and disappeared into the woods like smoke. Lily clung tighter. Back in town, the news broke. A girl missing for 7 years found alive. Social services swarmed. Reporters screamed questions. Cameras rolled. But Lily didn't speak. She wouldn't speak to anyone. Only the dog. Only Matt. A psychologist came in. Said she was in shock. Said she needed time. Matt didn't argue. But something wasn't right. That night, Lily refused to sleep alone. She curled up beside the dog on Matt's couch, whispering into his fur. Words Matt couldn't hear, until one word came clear. He's still here. Matt sat up, heart pounding. Who? Lily stared at him, eyes wide, pupils shaking. He never left. Then she opened her hand. In her palm, a tiny red button. From a firefighter's coat. It was still warm. Matt stared at the button in her hand, his breath caught in his chest. It wasn't just any button. It was regulation issue, fire-resistant, engraved on the inside. He knew because he had one exactly like it. Every firefighter did. And no one outside the department was supposed to have one. He took it gently from her hand and turned it over. The engraving was still there. B-271. He knew that number. It belonged to someone retired. Someone no longer on the roster. A man who vanished from the force after a quiet scandal the town buried fast. A man who used to live near the farmhouse. Royden Keller. Matt stood slowly. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He remembered Keller's name in passing. A veteran firefighter who was once praised for saving children from a school fire, until rumors surfaced. Allegations. Not about fire, but about the children. Then the man disappeared. Not arrested. Not investigated. Just gone. Lily was watching him, eyes wide. She didn't blink. She pointed toward the window. He's watching us, she whispered. The dog bolted upright, barking sharply at the glass. Matt raced to the door, threw it open. But the porch was empty. Street silent. moonlight washing the neighborhood in pale blue. He stepped outside slowly. Then something shifted at the edge of the woods. A shadow. Then another. Branches snapped. Fast footsteps. Fading. Matt didn't chase. He turned back inside and locked everything. The next morning, he requested Keller's address from the department database. There was nothing. Wiped. No forwarding location. No records. Just a termination note filed under voluntary leave. But Matt wasn't letting this trail go cold. He drove back to the cellar with the dog in the passenger seat. Lily stayed behind under police protection. She begged Matt not to go. Her hands shook as she begged. But he had to. He needed to know what Keller left behind. The hatch was still open. They descended again, deeper this time. Beyond the second door. Past the room where Lily had been. Further into a hallway no one had noticed before, bricked up behind an old metal cabinet. The dog had sniffed it, whined, and started scratching. Matt tore it down with his crowbar. The tunnel opened into a narrow corridor, lined with shelves, trophies, dolls, shoes, pieces of clothing, all children's things, carefully preserved, labeled. Matt's stomach turned. At the end of the corridor, a desk, covered in drawings. Dozens of them, all of Lily, all drawn by someone else, obsessively, repeatedly, from memory, and in the center a map, the area around the farmhouse, dotted in red excess, trees, cabins, outbuildings. He's still using the land. Matt took photos of everything, heart racing. As he turned to leave, his flashlight caught something scrawled in black ink on the wall behind the desk. She was mine. He took her from me. The writing was jagged, carved deep into the wall. Then footsteps. From above. Matt turned off the flashlight, held his breath. The dog didn't bark. He crouched low, ears flat, eyes on the stairs. Silence. Then a whisper. You never should have come back. Matt bolted, dog at his side, through the tunnel, up the hatch, into the light. But there was no one outside. Just wind. Just birds. Just silence thick enough to scream through. He drove straight to the police. Showed them everything. Photos. The map. The trophies. This time they listened. A raid was launched on a cabin 10 miles into the woods, marked on Keller's map. Inside they found chains, beds, locked trunks, photos, not just of Lily, other children, and in the corner a camcorder, still recording. But Keller was gone. No trace. Just a message carved into the cabin door. You should have let her burn. Matt drove home in silence. That night, Lily finally spoke again. More than whispers. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of warm milk, the dog resting at her feet. He didn't just keep me there, she said. He talked to me, every day. He said the fire was supposed to erase it all, that the dog ruined everything. Matt sat across from her, unable to breathe. She looked down. He made me watch the house burn. He locked me in and waited. But the dog, he came back, over and over, until he found a way in. And he stayed with me. She reached down, placed her hand gently on the shepherd's head. He never gave up. Matt leaned back, voice hoarse. Why didn't you scream when we found you? She looked up, her eyes older than any child's. Because I thought it was him. And I knew, if he was back, then someone else was about to disappear. The town tried to move on. Headlines faded. Reporters packed up. The cabin was sealed. Police offered vague statements about an ongoing manhunt. But Keller had vanished without a trace. No fingerprints. No vehicle. No witnesses. Only fear remained. Lily refused to return to school. She stayed at Matt's house, curled up with the German shepherd like she'd grown into his shadow. Every time a branch cracked outside, she flinched. Every knock on the door made her eyes search for exits. The dog never left her side. Matt tried to give her space. He cooked, cleaned, repaired the broken parts of the house. But nothing fixed the air. It still carried the weight of things left unsaid. One night, after days of silence, Lily placed something on the table. A drawing. It showed the farmhouse burning. The dog standing in front. and behind him, in the flames, a second figure. Watching. Smiling. "That's what I saw before he left me," she whispered. "He liked the fire. He said it made people forget what came before." Matt stared at the drawing, blood running cold. That night, the dog started barking again. Fierce. Constant. At the door. Matt rushed out with a flashlight. The front yard was empty, but the woods crackled. Then he saw it. Smoke. He grabbed his jacket, his keys, the dog already out the door before him. Lily shouted, begged him not to go. But he had to. He had to see where it was coming from. The smoke wasn't from the farmhouse. Came from deeper in the woods, toward one of the other marked locations on Keller's map. He found the source 20 minutes later. A small barn, consumed in flames. But the fire was too clean. No chaos. No collapsing structure. Just controlled, deliberate burning. And in front of it, a chair. Tied to it, a mannequin dressed in children's clothes. A message pinned to its chest. "You let her go. Now find the others." Matt fell to his knees. This wasn't over. Back at the house, Lily was gone. The door wide open, the couch cold. But the dog was there, blood on his paws, and a scrap of fabric in his mouth. Lily's jacket. Matt didn't hesitate. He ran. Into the woods. The dog leading. No time for doubt. No time for fear. Only one mission. Save her. They followed the trail deep into the trees. Past where the map ended. Over ridges. Through frozen creeks. Until they reached a clearing. A second cellar door. Hidden under brush. Locked tight. The dog dug like his soul was on fire. Matt smashed the lock with a rock. Inside it was quiet. Too quiet. No chains. No trophies. Just a single room. And Lily, standing alone, arms folded, eyes dry. Matt rushed to her, grabbed her shoulders. "Are you hurt? Did he?" She shook her head. "He's not here." "Then why are you?" She looked past him. "Because he wants you." The door slammed. Gas hissed from vents. The room filled fast. The dog jumped toward the sound, barking furiously. Matt grabbed Lily, threw her toward the entrance, but the handle was already searing hot. A speaker crackled overhead. "You should have left the fire alone." Keller's voice, cold, calm. "The fire erases the past. You ruined that. Now you'll become it." The shepherd barked louder, then turned and ran to the far wall, pawing at a vent. Matt helped, ripping it open. A tunnel behind it, small but real. Lily crawled through first. The dog next. Matt last. They escaped into the woods just as flames swallowed the hidden bunker. They didn't stop running for miles. When they finally reached the road, emergency lights flashed in the distance. Police. Someone had triggered the signal from Matt's truck. Left nearby. Lily was safe, but Keller was gone. Again. In the weeks that followed, Lily began to smile. Sometimes. The dog stayed with her, guarding her like a soul stitched to her shadow. Matt adopted him officially, gave him a name, because he always came back from the fire. The town started to ask questions. More children came forward with stories. Forgotten cases reopened. More survivors found. And then, months later, a package arrived at Matt's door. No return address. Inside, ashes. A photo. Lily, sleeping. And behind her, barely visible through a window, a man, watching. The shepherd stood in front of the package. Growled once. Deep, low. Then walked to the door and waited. He was ready. If the story burned into your chest like it did ours, comment what stayed with you. Subscribe if you're not already part of this journey, because we're not done. Ash never stops until every shadow has a name.
A police officer was patrolling the quiet edge of redwood pines when he saw a man raising a stick to strike a starving German shepherd that had only run up for a scrap of food. The officer's instincts kicked in. He stopped his car, stepped out, and his heart froze when he saw the dog's ribs showing through its matted fur, yet its eyes still shone with a desperate will to live. He had no idea that saving this dog would lead him into a dark web of cruelty hidden deep in the forest, and to a bond that would change both their lives forever. What happened next will make you cry and believe in second chances. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe every dog deserves a loving home, not fear and pain, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see the world. Redwood Pines was the kind of town where winter arrived quietly. No harsh blizzards or biting winds, just a muted stillness that hung in the air like breath not yet spoken. The trees here were tall and old, mostly pine, their needles brushing softly against one another in the breeze, as if whispering secrets only they could understand. On that particular afternoon, the sky wore a dull gray coat, the sun thin behind layers of clouds. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and a fine mist clung to the branches and the hood of Officer Ethan Carter's cruiser as he drove slowly along a forest-side road just beyond the town's northern edge. Ethan Carter, 34 years old, was a man who had learned how to blend into silence. He stood 6 feet tall, had a lean build, and carried himself like someone who had once been unshakable but now moved carefully. Like every step was a test of balance between duty and something heavier. He had short brown hair with hints of gray near the temples, a result not just of age but of grief. His hazel eyes often seemed far away, not unfocused but focused somewhere the rest of the world couldn't quite see. Since his wife, Rachel, had died in a car crash 18 months ago, Ethan had become quieter, slower to speak, and quicker to notice the small, forgotten things: an untied shoe, a stray sock in a gutter, a lonely child staring at a vending machine with empty pockets. Today was like most others since the funeral. Ethan had chosen to patrol this stretch of road that curled along the forest's edge, part out of habit, part out of hope. The silence out here wasn't empty. It was thoughtful. And for a man still rebuilding himself, that kind of silence was a kind of balm. As he eased the cruiser around a bend, something on the shoulder caught his attention, a sudden, violent movement. Ethan slowed, instinct rising in him like a tide. Ahead, a man stood at the edge of the road, arm raised. His figure was heavy-set, mid-40s, with a thick torso wrapped in a faded camo jacket and grease-stained jeans. His face was ruddy, jaw unshaven, his grayish-blonde beard uneven and wild. He had that look, one too many drinks the night before, and a chip on his shoulder that never quite went away. He gripped a broken wooden stick, like part of a shovel handle, and was swinging it down toward the ground with force. Ethan's eyes dropped to where the strike was landing, and his gut tightened. A German shepherd. The dog was cowering, ribs sharp beneath his patchy coat, ears flattened against his skull. His fur, once likely a rich tan and black, was matted with dirt and dried mud, tail tucked but not fully curled. This wasn't a wild dog. This was a dog who had known people, and been hurt by them. The dog growled low, not in defiance but in warning. Between his front paws was a tattered plastic grocery bag, translucent with time, containing the few remnants of food, half a biscuit, a piece of torn bread, maybe some cold fries. And still, despite the blows, the dog shielded it with his body like it was treasure. Ethan pulled the cruiser over, his tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. He flicked off the engine but left the emergency lights off. This didn't need to become a spectacle. Not yet. He stepped out into the cold, adjusting his duty belt and resting a calm hand on the top of the door. "Hey there," he said, his voice level but carrying across the space. "Put the stick down." The man turned. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his breath smoked in the air. He looked Ethan over like he was trying to decide how much trouble the uniform meant today. "This stray came at me," the man said defensively. "Tried to bite me, was sniffing my sandwich. I got every right to protect myself." Ethan took a slow step forward, scanning both the man and the dog. The shepherd was not aggressive. He was trembling more from cold and exhaustion than fear, but he didn't bark or lunge. His amber eyes flicked between the two men, his jaw twitching slightly, still growling, still guarding. "You've got a right to feel safe," Ethan said evenly. "But beating an animal like that? That's not self-defense, that's cruelty." The man sneered. "It's a mutt. Ain't got no tag, no collar, probably rabid." I don't see foam. I see a hungry dog guarding scraps, Ethan replied. He slowly knelt, letting his posture sink low, open, non-threatening. Come on, buddy. You're okay now. From his pocket he pulled a small beef jerky stick. The scent made the shepherd's nose twitch. I've got something better than cold bread, Ethan murmured. The dog didn't move. Not yet, but his growl quieted. The man with the stick huffed, shifting weight from one foot to the other. You taking it then? That thing's a nuisance. I'm taking him, Ethan confirmed, and I'll be filing a report on what I just saw. You serious? The man scoffed. I'm serious. Ethan held out the jerky, closer now. The shepherd leaned forward tentatively, then inched forward on his belly and took it. His teeth were yellowed, but not rotting. He was young, maybe 2 or 3 years old, probably dumped after someone couldn't afford him anymore, or worse, used for something cruel. Ethan stood slowly, pulling a blue slip leash from his belt. He let it dangle. Let's go, boy, he said gently. You've had enough hurt. The dog hesitated. Then, like some silent decision passed between them, he stepped forward and slid his head into the loop. The plastic bag still lay on the ground. The shepherd looked at it once, then turned his gaze back to Ethan. Ethan picked it up. I'll bring it, he said softly. But you're getting better today. The man in the camo jacket rolled his eyes. Whatever. Ethan turned back. Name? Hank, the man muttered. Last name? He didn't answer. Ethan didn't press it for now. Animal control will follow up. He walked the dog to the cruiser, opened the back. The shepherd jumped in, surprisingly agile. He turned in a circle, then settled, eyes alert. As Ethan closed the door, he looked at the man one last time. You do this again, and next time you're not walking away with just a warning. The man didn't answer. He was already walking off into the woods, grumbling to himself. Ethan got into the driver's seat, took one look in the rearview mirror. The shepherd met his gaze, unmoving. Ethan nodded to himself. Today, meaning had found him, and he was bringing it back to town. The overhead lights in Redwood Pines police station flickered with their usual uneven hum, casting a sterile glow across the main operations room. The place was mostly empty, just a lone dispatcher in the corner flipping through takeout menus and the occasional clack of keys from behind the front desk. The cold followed Ethan Carter inside as he pushed through the double doors with a quiet German shepherd walking gingerly at his side. The dog's gait was uneven, favoring his right hind leg. Dried mud clung to the fur between his paws. His ribs, more prominent under the station lighting than they'd seemed in the gray forest twilight, moved with shallow breath. Ethan led him into the small break room, pausing only to grab a towel from a supply cabinet and a first aid kit from the shelf beside the mini-fridge. The break room was small 2 tables, a fridge covered in outdated flyers and missing pet notices, a microwave with a dent in its side, and an old sofa that sagged like it held 1,000 stories in its worn cushions. Ethan laid the towel out on the floor and gestured gently. The dog hesitated. He looked at the towel, then at Ethan, then back at the door. I get it, Ethan murmured. I wouldn't trust me either. He sank slowly to the floor and leaned back against the fridge. He removed his jacket and draped it across his knees, creating a softer tone in the room. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the half sandwich he hadn't finished earlier, a turkey and cheddar on wheat, wrapped in wax paper. He peeled it open, broke off a corner, and slid it across the floor. The dog's ears twitched. Hunger gnawed louder than fear. Cautiously, he crept forward, still limping slightly, and sniffed the offering. A second later, it vanished into his mouth. Ethan smiled. Good boy, he said. There's more if you want it, but I need to check that leg. He extended another piece. This time the dog didn't retreat after taking it. Instead, he sat cautiously, alert, and watched Ethan's hands as the officer pulled a packet of antiseptic wipes from the kit. Ethan moved slow. Every shift of his hand was a negotiation. The dog flinched as the wipe neared the injured leg, but didn't growl. There was trust beginning to sprout in that space between silence and flinch. As Ethan dabbed gently at the raw skin near the paw pad, He noticed something. A scar near the hock joint, long-heeled but crooked, as if the dog had once been caught in something metal, possibly a snare or barbed wire. This wasn't his first brush with pain. Ethan whispered softly as he worked, not out of habit, but because silence felt too sharp. He didn't hear the phone vibrating in his coat pocket until the second buzz. With a soft apology, he reached for it and checked the screen. Lisa Baxter. He swiped to answer. Lisa Baxter, 42, was the only full-time officer with Redwood Pines Animal Protection Unit. She had a broad-shouldered frame, the sun-scorched complexion of someone who rarely remembered sunscreen, and thick auburn hair perpetually tied in a haphazard braid. Her voice was no nonsense, but her heart had earned her the nickname the soft cop around town. "Hey," she said, voice crackling with urgency. "You on duty near the edge of Highway 9 today?" "Just came back from there," Ethan replied, watching as the dog tentatively inched closer and laid his chin on the towel. "Figured. We've had 3 more anonymous reports of animal cruelty in the last 2 weeks, all clustered around the east side of the forest. Dead drop traps, signs of illegal tethering, even someone claiming they saw dogs being thrown from a truck bed." Ethan's brows furrowed. "I just picked up a shepherd near that stretch. Looked like someone was going to beat him." "Same guy?" "Hard to say," Ethan replied. "But I logged his name Hank something. He didn't stick around." "Keep an eye on that area," Lisa said. "And if that shepherd you found reacts to trucks, make a note. It could help." "Copy that." He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket. The shepherd had lifted his head. His ears were angled forward, listening. "You understood that, didn't you?" Ethan said, more to himself. Almost as if in response, the dog's ears twitched at the faint sound of an engine passing outside one of the late-night delivery trucks that rolled through town on its way to the 24-hour warehouse 10 miles east. The dog's body stiffened. His gaze snapped toward the front entrance, and he gave a single, sharp bark. Not panicked, not frantic, just alert. Ethan stood, startled. "You know that sound." The bark came again. The shepherd padded slowly to the door, peered through the glass as the red glow of taillights faded into the misty night. Ethan made a mental note. Memory, it seemed, ran deep in this one. Later that night, Ethan set up a crate in his office, lining it with an old blanket and placing a small bowl of water and some kibble nearby. The dog, unnamed, unclaimed, and still reluctant to make full eye contact, stepped into the crate without resistance, turned once, and lay down. Ethan sat at his desk, watching the rise and fall of the dog's sides, wondering what else this quiet animal had seen, what it remembered, and what it was still trying to forget. Before switching off the light, he scribbled a note in his field journal. Shepherd responded strongly to truck engine noise. Possible prior trauma linked to moving vehicle. Behavioral memory intact. No aggression toward humans since intake. Cautious, but responsive. Trust forming. Then he looked back at the crate, and for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel so lonely. The morning in Redwood Pines broke slow and gray. Mist hung in the trees like cobwebs spun between pine boughs, and the air was thick with damp earth and silence. Ethan Carter sipped his coffee on the back steps of the station, watching shadows stretch on the wet grass of the small fenced yard behind the building. The dog had been calmer since their first night together, his ribs still visible, but his eyes brighter. Trust had begun to root itself in tiny ways, the way Shadow sat near the door without being told, or how he waited, watching, before eating as if confirming that Ethan would not disappear. Ethan had chosen the name Shadow the previous night, after noticing how the dog followed him soundlessly from room to room, always present but never imposing. There was a dignity in the dog's movements, quiet, measured, with just a hint of weariness that never slowed him down. Shadow didn't demand affection, but he didn't reject it either. When Ethan had laid a hand on his back just behind the shoulder blades, Shadow had gone still for a heartbeat before letting out a breath that sounded like surrender. That was the moment the name had stuck. Ethan opened the gate, and Shadow looked up, tail giving a cautious wag. "Let's walk," Ethan said. They followed a dirt path that ran behind the station and disappeared into the dense woods that surrounded the north side of town. The trail was rarely used except by hikers or the occasional teen looking for somewhere to smoke without being seen. But Ethan knew it well. He used to walk here with Rachel on Sunday mornings, their only real time off together. As they moved deeper into the trees, Shadow's posture changed. His head lowered, ears pricked forward, nose twitching with intention. The leash in Ethan's hand went taut. "What is it?" Ethan murmured. Shadow didn't bark or growl. He simply turned off the trail and began to move with purpose, pulling Ethan through the underbrush. Branches scraped Ethan's sleeves and thorns snagged at his boots as they pushed through the thicket. They climbed over a fallen tree, ducked beneath a low limb, and finally came upon a clearing obscured by dense laurel bushes and tall grass. In the center of the clearing sat a small wooden shack, long since abandoned. Its roof sagged under the weight of time and weather, and moss crept up its lower walls. A rusted horseshoe hung crooked on the door, and a single broken window stared back at them like a blind eye. Shadow growled low in his throat. Ethan approached cautiously, his other hand resting lightly near his sidearm. The door creaked when he pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and sour, rotting wood, old urine, something metallic beneath it all. The room was bare except for a tipped-over crate, a torn sleeping bag, and a pile of empty fast food wrappers and crushed soda cans in the corner. But it was the chain that caught Ethan's attention. A thick iron chain bolted to the wall, frayed nylon collar still attached, the edge of the strap soaked in what looked like dried blood. Shadow entered the shack behind him, nose to the ground. He sniffed the corner, the wrappers, then the chain. He froze, his whole body tensed, then barked once sharp and unmistakable. Ethan took out his phone and snapped several photos. The place hadn't been used recently, but it hadn't been abandoned long either. Someone had been keeping animals here, and if the chain was any sign, they hadn't been treated kindly. Back at the station, Ethan uploaded the images and filed a preliminary report. He was halfway through typing when his phone buzzed. It was Lisa. "Hey," she said, no greeting. "I've got something. Might be related to your shepherd." "Go on." "There's been a spike in missing dog reports way more than usual for a town this size. Not just strays-owned dogs, too. Backyard pets. 4 gone this week alone, and they all vanished within 5 miles of that forest trail." "That lines up with what we found today," Ethan said. He described the shack, the chain, the blood. Lisa cursed under her breath. "Someone's using the woods, maybe multiple spots. Might be holding the dogs there before selling them, or worse. You thinking fighting rings? I wouldn't rule it out." Ethan glanced toward Shadow, who was now lying near the desk, his eyes closed but ears still flicking at every sound. He looked peaceful, but Ethan knew that inside that stillness was a dog who remembered every bad place he'd ever been. "I think Shadow knows more than we realize," Ethan said. "He led me straight there. He's got a nose for it." "Well then," Lisa said, "he might be your best lead." They ended the call, and Ethan looked down at his notes. The town had always felt safe, but something ugly had grown just beyond the edges out in the woods, where silence could hide anything. Ethan reached down and placed a hand on Shadow's back. "You ready to go again tomorrow?" he asked softly. Shadow didn't open his eyes, but his tail gave one slow, steady wag. By mid-morning the following day, the overcast sky above redwood pines had given way to a brief sliver of pale blue, like the town was trying to breathe after days of holding its breath. The woods remained wet and quiet, still carrying the scent of moss, cold soil, and pine needles soaked through. Inside the police station, however, the air buzzed with quiet purpose. Ethan Carter sat at his desk going through county records on a second monitor while Shadow lay stretched out beneath his chair, his head resting on his paws, ears flicking occasionally at the clicking of keys. The warmth of the heater hummed softly, and despite the comfort, Ethan's focus was razor-sharp. He had narrowed down the name Hank to a single possibility the night before, but this morning confirmed it. Hank Dorsey, age 47, local laborer with a long history of citations. A broad-shouldered man with a heavy walk and a mean streak, Hank had a file that made Ethan's stomach twist. 3 prior charges of animal neglect, one involving the seizure of malnourished pit bulls, another for unlicensed breeding, and the most recent dismissed due to lack of evidence for illegal dogfighting. Ethan leaned back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. "He's done this before," he muttered. Lisa Baxter arrived at the station just after noon, parking her beat-up white Jeep out front. She strode through the entrance with her usual no-nonsense gait, her brown work boots scuffed from trudging through brush and barns. Her auburn braid was tied tighter today, and her forest green field jacket still held patches of dried mud on the elbows. She tossed a folder onto Ethan's desk. "That's everything I could dig up on Dorsey from Animal Control Archives," she said. "He's been on and off our radar for nearly a decade, never keeps the same address more than 6 months, always just outside town limits, and there's a rumor that he's working with a group operating near the county line." Ethan flipped the folder open. Several blurry photos showed pens of dogs behind sheds, blue tarps rigged into crude kennels, and grainy stills of pickup trucks with cages in the bed. "What kind of group?" Lisa shrugged, arms crossed. "Fighting rings, most likely. Some whispers about trafficking to selling aggressive breeds to buyers out of state. Could be connected to something bigger." Ethan glanced down at Shadow, who looked up at the sound of Lisa's voice. The dog's amber eyes blinked once, calm but alert. "He found the shack," Ethan said, "and he's got a nose. If those dogs were moved through the woods, he might be able to track them again." Lisa nodded. "Let's test that theory." Later that afternoon, they returned to the same forest path behind the station. Ethan wore a dark brown flannel shirt under his vest, and Lisa came armed with a small duffel of evidence markers and a portable camera. Shadow trotted ahead, tail slightly raised, nose close to the ground. The woods were quieter today, heavier. The trees creaked faintly in the wind, and a crow called once from far above before vanishing from view. Shadow led them quickly past the shack and veered west into a thicket that neither of them had noticed before. Ethan followed without hesitation, the brambles pulling at his sleeves. After 20 minutes, Shadow slowed. He sniffed the ground, circled, then headed downslope into a shallow ravine. At the base of the incline, shielded by thick brush and half covered by a fallen tarp, stood a row of wooden pens, barely held together by rusted wire and mismatched boards. The structure looked like it had been assembled in haste, more for hiding than housing. Several of the pens had old straw inside, stained and flattened. One had a broken water bowl tipped on its side. A pair of collars sat discarded near a tree stump, their tags scratched blank. Lisa snapped photos while Ethan opened a pen and inspected the interior. "Recently used," he said. "Some of this straw's still warm." Lisa crouched beside a footprint in the mud, deep, wide, and angled slightly outward. "Work boots, fresh tread. They were here no more than a day ago." Shadow sniffed along the outer edge of the pens, tail down now, his movements more cautious. He stopped near a cluster of trees, pawed at the earth, then looked back at Ethan. A faint trail of disturbed leaves extended past the trees, likely an exit path. "He found their route," Lisa said. "He's better than some of our certified canines." Ethan crouched beside the dog, placing a steady hand on his back. "He's done this before. He just didn't have the badge." That night, as the sky darkened and the wind picked up, Ethan sat alone in his living room. The television was on but muted. Shadow lay on a folded quilt near the fireplace, occasionally lifting his head when a branch brushed against the window. Ethan stared into the flames. He remembered being 12. His parents had died in a house fire, one of those sudden, cruel blazes that start with bad wiring and end with everything turned to ash. For a while, he had lived with an aunt on the edge of the same woods. It was during that year that he had found a stray, a mutt with a split ear and eyes that never blinked first. The dog had been caught in a wire snare and nearly bled out before Ethan found him. He had carried the dog back to the cabin in his arms, hands shaking, not knowing what to do except try. The dog had healed. And in those silent weeks, when nightmares crept in and words wouldn't come, It had been the dog always waiting at the foot of the bed who had taught Ethan to sleep again. Now, decades later, another dog was helping him heal something he hadn't known was still broken. He looked over at Shadow, who blinked once in the firelight, then rested his head back down. Tomorrow, they would follow the trail deeper. But tonight, they had earned a moment of warmth. Nightfall in redwood pines brought a damp chill that settled deep into the bones. The moon hung low behind streaks of cloud, casting an eerie silver over the treetops. Ethan Carter stood at the edge of the woods, dressed in black tactical gear, his breath forming pale clouds in the air. His hand rested lightly on Shadow's back as the dog stood alert beside him, muscles taut, ears forward, nose twitching as he took in every scent drifting on the wind. Beside Ethan stood Officer Chris Morales, 29, a young but capable patrolman with a square jaw, dark buzz-cut hair, and a sharp sense of loyalty. Chris had grown up in Redwood Pines, a local boy-turned-officer, known for his calm demeanor under pressure and a sense of humor that could cut through even the tensest situations. Tonight, though, his face was serious. Behind them, Lisa crouched near a bush, checking her gear. She wore a dark, olive jacket and had her camera rig strapped to her chest, ready to document everything. The trio had spent the last 2 hours mapping out a quiet route to the makeshift kennel deep in the woods, following the path Shadow had discovered the day before. No lights, no radio chatter, just darkness and tension. "You good, Ethan?" Chris whispered. Ethan gave a nod. "Let's move." Shadow took the lead. They followed the narrow trail, ducking under branches, moving in silence but for the soft crunch of pine needles beneath their boots. Shadow paused occasionally to check the air, his body low and alert. When they reached the ridge above the kennels, they dropped low behind a line of brush. From this vantage point, they could see the pens again. 7 of them, some with tarps partially pulled over the tops. A dull glow came from a floodlight hanging by a wire nailed to a nearby tree. It blinked irregularly, casting jerky shadows across the clearing. No voices, no movement. "He's not here," Lisa said quietly, "or he's hiding." Ethan watched Shadow. The dog stared straight ahead, then looked back at Ethan. The look wasn't fear, it was a signal. Ready. "Let him go," Ethan said. Shadow darted forward like smoke. He weaved through the clearing's edge, body low to the ground, almost invisible in the brush. When he reached the pens, he circled them, then stopped in front of the 4th one, pawing at the side. Ethan and Chris moved in, silent and quick. Lisa stayed back, filming from the cover of trees. Ethan reached the 4th pen and peered inside. 7 dogs. Mutt mixes, a terrier, 2 pit bulls, a young Rottweiler. One of the pits trembled violently. Another barked once before Shadow stepped close to the wire and gave a quiet, calming growl, just enough to grab attention, not enough to alarm. The bark stopped. The dogs looked at him, ears perked. "Good boy," Ethan murmured. "Keep them calm." Chris moved to the lock. "Cheap padlocks," he said, pulling a tension tool from his pocket. "Give me 20 seconds." As Chris worked, Ethan moved between the pens, checking each for occupants. Most were empty or showed signs of recent use: fur, feces, scraps of torn blankets. All of it painted a grim picture. They opened the 4th pen first. The dogs hesitated. Shadow stepped inside. He sniffed one, then another, and wagged his tail, slow, gentle. The smallest of the dogs, a tan mutt with white paws, moved first, stepping forward and nudging Shadow's side. Shadow let him. That was all it took. The others followed. Ethan and Chris led them out one by one, attaching spare leashes they'd brought. It was a slow, quiet procession through the woods, each dog moving with uncertainty until Shadow looped back and walked beside them, guiding them like a seasoned leader. When they returned to the transport van Lisa had hidden behind a fallen tree down the road, the dogs were quickly loaded into crates. Water bowls slid through the grates. Lisa documented each one, tagging collars and noting behavior. "That all of them?" she asked. "No," Ethan said. "He's gone." They searched the area, no signs of Hank. The shack had been cleared out. A few cigarette butts and the muddy imprint of a boot leading away were the only clues left behind. Hank Dorsey had vanished. Later that night, back at the station, the rescued dogs were lined up in the holding area, some pacing, others curled up and sleeping. One of them, the tan mutt with white paws, was especially restless, panting, scratching at the crate door, whining. Lisa called Ethan over. "I think this one knows something. He won't settle." They checked his tag. Nothing. Just a faded blue collar, no ID. But something about the dog was familiar. The next morning, just after sunrise, a family pulled into the station lot in a red sedan. The father, Michael Young, early 40s, dressed in a soft gray hoodie and jeans, had tears in his eyes before he even opened the door. His wife, Janet, tall and thin with shoulder-length blonde hair, was holding a stack of flyers. "Lost Dog, Benji," in bold red letters. Their son, Oliver, maybe 10 years old, was gripping a leash in his hand even though there was no dog attached. His dark hair was messy and his eyes red from crying. He looked around as they stepped inside. "Someone called," Michael said. "Said you found a tan mutt last night near the woods. Said it might be ours." Ethan took them to the kennels. As soon as Oliver stepped near the crate, the dog began barking, not with fear, but joy. The tail slammed against the crate wall like a drumbeat. Oliver dropped to his knees. "Benji!" he cried. Lisa opened the crate, and Benji launched into the boy's arms, licking his face, his whole body vibrating. Michael choked up. Janet wiped her eyes. "We thought he was gone for good," she whispered. "He's been missing for weeks. We posted flyers all over town." Ethan stepped back, giving them space. Shadow sat at his side, watching, head slightly tilted. "He's the one who found them," Ethan said softly. Michael looked over and met Ethan's eyes. "Then you saved more than just a dog last night." It was just past midnight in Redwood Pines, and the town was asleep beneath a canopy of wind-stirred clouds. The streetlights along Hawthorne Avenue flickered occasionally, catching leaves as they tumbled over empty sidewalks. Ethan Carter's small two-bedroom home sat near the edge of a tree line, its back porch facing the woods he now walked so often with Shadow. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that should bring peace, but tonight it felt thin, like silence waiting to crack. Inside, Ethan lay half asleep on the living room couch, a worn blanket thrown over his legs, the television screen dark after hours of unused streaming. A cold mug of coffee rested on the side table beside a copy of an old field report he never finished reading. Shadow lay curled up near the back door, head resting between his front paws, but his ears twitched at every sound ever alert, even in sleep. Ethan stirred slightly, muttering Rachel's name under his breath, lost in some dream that didn't want to let go. That was when Shadow's head shot up. A crunch. Not loud, but distinct. A boot on gravel. Shadow rose silently, moved toward the back door, tail stiff and low. His eyes, deep amber and sharp even in low light, locked on the window. Another sound followed, the faint click of a gate unlatching. Shadow growled. Then came the scent. He recognized it instantly. He barked once, sharp and loud, and then again, deep and furious. The sound echoed through the house like a warning bell. Ethan jolted upright, knocking the mug off the table. It hit the floor and shattered, but Ethan didn't notice. He was on his feet in seconds, grabbing the flashlight and his sidearm from the nearby drawer. Shadow stood at the door, barking now with purpose, pawing at the frame. "What is it?" Ethan whispered, but his gut already knew. He opened the door. The yard was dim, lit only by the soft spill of porch light and the half-moon overhead. Shadow pushed forward, nose to the air, muscles tense. Ethan followed, scanning the shadows along the fence line. Then he saw it, a figure slipping through the back gate, heavy set, shoulders hunched, disappearing into the woods beyond. "Hank," Ethan muttered, and ran. He shouted once, "Stop!" The man didn't. Shadow raced ahead, faster than Ethan expected, weaving through the trees like a shadow himself. Ethan followed the sound of breaking branches and heavy footfalls, his flashlight beam slicing through the dark. But the trees were thick, and Hank Dorsey knew the forest better than most. Within minutes, the noises faded. Ethan stopped at a clearing, breath visible in the cold air. Shadow circled back, panting but unharmed, ears still pricked. "He came here for you," Ethan said, kneeling to meet Shadow's eyes. "And you knew it." Back at the house, Ethan secured the gate and checked every lock twice. He called it in to dispatch and wrote up a brief incident report, but he already knew there wasn't much they could do tonight. No proof left behind. No cameras in the backyard. Just the echo of a threat and a dog that refused to let it happen. The next morning, Lisa showed up at Ethan's doorstep with a to-go tray of coffee and a look that suggested she already knew what happened. Lisa, as usual, wore her sturdy green jacket, her boots mud-splattered from early morning shelter rounds. She handed him a cup and stepped inside. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "He came back. Hank. I didn't see his face, but Shadow did. Picked up his scent before he even reached the door." Lisa's jaw tightened. "He's escalating." Ethan nodded toward the dog now lying under the table. "Shadow stopped him. Woke me before the guy got close." Lisa crouched beside Shadow, scratching behind his ear. "Good boy," she whispered. Then she looked at Ethan. "You're not keeping him at the station anymore. I got the garage reinforced. I locked the crate." "No," she interrupted. "He's not a case file. He's your dog. That man came here looking to hurt him. If he was at the station alone, no one would have known. You said it yourself. He's loyal, he's alert, and he's smart. Let him stay here, where it's safe." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He sipped his coffee, staring out the kitchen window at the trees beyond. The woods looked calm again, but he knew better. Hank had made his move, and next time he might not run. He looked back at Shadow. "You want to stay?" he asked softly. Shadow lifted his head and wagged his tail. Rain swept across redwood pines in steady sheets, blurring the outlines of buildings and soaking the already soggy forest floors. It had rained all night and showed no signs of stopping. The streets gleamed under streetlights, the gutters flowing like small rivers. In the low, gray morning, the town moved slower than usual, the dampness soaking into everything, including people's moods. But inside the police station, the air crackled with something else entirely: momentum. Ethan Carter stood near the evidence board, rainwater still dripping from his jacket shoulders. Shadow sat beside him, tail resting on the tile, fur slightly damp but calm. Across the room, Lisa and Officer Chris Morales reviewed the updated reports with focused energy. The air smelled of strong coffee, wet dog, and something sharper urgency. "Here's the break," Lisa said, pinning a photo onto the board. It was grainy, taken from an old trail cam, but the subject was unmistakable. Hank Dorsey, hauling a crate into the back of a truck in the woods 2 nights earlier. The timestamp matched the same night he had tried to sneak into Ethan's yard. Ethan folded his arms. "That's solid. Combined with the shack photos, the boot prints, and the crates we pulled from the kennel site, we've got enough for a warrant." Chris, standing to the side with his usual calm alertness, added, "We've also got a witness." He handed Ethan a statement printed on fresh paper. Ethan read quickly. Cliff Ramsey, 61, a reclusive handyman who lived in a trailer near the outskirts of town. Short and wiry, known mostly for fixing fence posts and avoiding people. He'd seen a truck stop near an abandoned feed warehouse last night, same license plate Ethan had logged 2 weeks earlier. He didn't know the driver, but he recognized the dog in the truck bed. It had a torn blue collar. Cliff used to feed that dog scraps behind the general store before it vanished. Ethan set the page down. "That's enough." By late afternoon, a team of officers from the county and animal control had gathered outside the old warehouse. The place was an industrial relic, 3 stories of rusting metal, shattered windows, and graffiti-tagged walls. It sat on the edge of a deserted road, far enough outside town to avoid suspicion, but close enough for late-night traffic to go unnoticed. Ethan stood with Shadow near the rear of the group. He wore a black tactical vest over his dark flannel, a sidearm holstered at his hip. Shadow, now groomed and fit after weeks under Ethan's care, stood poised, his ears pricked forward, his nose working the wind. Captain Maynard, a tall, broad man with a graying buzz cut and decades of no-nonsense policing carved into his face, reviewed the plan with the team. His voice was steady. "We breach quietly, sweep for animals first, then locate the suspect. Last visual places Hank Dorsey here last night. The truck's out front. We move in fast." He looked to Ethan. "Your dog up for it?" Ethan glanced down at Shadow, who looked up at him with calm focus. "He's ready." The team fanned out two groups flanking the main entrance, one sweeping around back. Ethan and Shadow moved with the second team, Lisa trailing close behind with her camera. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the clouds hung heavy above the scene. As they reached the side door, Shadow tensed. "Something's inside," Ethan whispered. He gave the silent signal. Shadow pushed forward. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the warehouse smelled of oil, wet wood, and the unmistakable scent of fear. The space was dimly lit by hanging bulbs strung from the rafters. Stacked crates lined the walls, and in the far corner behind a metal gate, several dogs whimpered softly. One barked once, then stopped. Movement to the left. "Hank Dorsey!" Ethan shouted, raising his voice. "Police! Step out with your hands up!" A figure bolted from the shadows, crashing into a stack of crates, then sprinting toward a rear exit. "Shadow, go!" The dog exploded forward in a blur of muscle and determination. He darted around broken pallets, through crates, past the gate, and reached the exit door just as Hank threw it open. Hank stumbled back when he saw the dog. His hand fumbled for something, maybe a crowbar, maybe a wrench. But he never had the chance. Shadow growled once, stepped into his path, and stood firm. Hank froze. Ethan and two officers were there seconds later, guns drawn, voices shouting. Hank looked around, saw no escape, and dropped the tool with a clatter. Okay, don't shoot. Just get that damn dog away from me." Ethan didn't smile, but his voice was calm. "He's the reason you're not running right now." Officers cuffed Hank and walked him out of the warehouse, past the pens, past the team loading crates of frightened, malnourished dogs into animal control vans. Reporters had already begun to gather at the street entrance. Lisa stepped forward with her camera and caught the moment Hank was loaded into the back of a cruiser, head bowed, soaked from rain. 2 days later, the footage of the warehouse sweep, paired with Lisa's report and statements from Cliff Ramsey, made headlines in local and state outlets. Animal rights groups issued statements. Pet shelters across the region reposted photos of the rescued dogs. And more than a dozen petitions circulated online calling for harsher sentences on repeat offenders of animal cruelty. Shadow's photo taken just as he stood in the warehouse doorway, blocking Hank's escape, was used as the cover image for an article titled "The Dog That Stood His Ground." At home, Ethan fed Shadow dinner and sat beside him on the back porch as the wind picked up again. The trees whispered above them. "You did good," Ethan said, hand resting lightly on Shadow's back. Shadow, ever quiet, leaned slightly into the touch. Autumn had arrived in Redwood Pines. The town wore its golden crown of amber leaves, and the crisp breeze carried with it the scent of change. The once troubled corners of the town felt softer, lighter, as if the air itself remembered what had been saved and what had been lost. 3 weeks had passed since Hank Dorsey was sentenced. The courtroom had been packed journalists, activists, citizens, and even a few students with clipboards for a school project. Judge Wallace, a stern but fair woman in her late 60s with silver hair tied in a bun and a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, had read the verdict without ceremony. Hank was to serve 15 years for organized animal cruelty, obstruction of justice, and assault on an officer. There had been no outbursts, no apologies, just the clinking of handcuffs and the quiet relief of a community breathing easier. Ethan Carter stood outside the courthouse steps afterward, flanked by Lisa Tran and, of course, Shadow. The German Shepherd, now fully recovered, looked alert and poised as always. His fur had regained its luster, the scars fading beneath new growth. At 7 years old, he moved with practiced discipline, but the gentle spirit of a soul who had survived. Cameras clicked as children asked if they could pet Shadow, and Ethan, with a small smile, nodded. Shadow sat patiently as small hands touched his ears and cheeks, his tail giving soft thuds against the concrete. That night, Ethan sat on the porch of his home, an old two-story farmhouse with faded blue paint and a rusted swing that creaked in the wind. The sky was a watercolor of purples and oranges, stars just beginning to peek through. Shadow lay by his feet, watching the field, ears still attuned to distant sounds. Lisa arrived, as she often did now, carrying a cardboard box labeled foster forms and flyers. She wore jeans tucked into worn leather boots and a flannel rolled at the sleeves. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her face carried the contented exhaustion of someone who was making something real. "We got approved," she said, placing the box on the porch bench. "The rescue's official." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Already?" "People don't say no to a dog like Shadow," she replied, tossing him a brochure. At the top, in bold letters, "Second Chance Rescue, inspired by Shadow, built for every animal in need." Inside were pictures of Shadow during the warehouse raid, his recovery, and a photo of him standing beside Ethan during a patrol. "They want to name him the honorary mascot," she said. Ethan glanced at the dog, who gave a soft huff as if sensing the attention. "He's not going to want a costume." Lisa laughed. "No costumes, just a vest, Community K9. The program they launched was simple in structure but powerful in purpose. They partnered with local shelters to create a foster-to-adopt initiative, funded partly by donations and partly by municipal grants. Lisa handled the logistics, organizing volunteers, managing social media, working with shelters. Ethan provided safety, credibility, and the occasional patrol route turned publicity event. Shadow was both mascot and ambassador. The town responded. Families who once eyed stray dogs with suspicion now visited adoption events. Children started asking for a shadow dog for Christmas. Murals were painted across the community center, one showing Shadow leaping toward the warehouse door, another of him lying next to a rescued puppy. Shadow's face, noble and watchful, became the symbol of resilience. Among the many who visited was Sarah Green, a quiet, widowed woman in her early 50s who had never owned a pet before. She stood at one of the events holding a leash to a small terrier mix named Bixby. Sarah was petite, with short curly gray hair and reading glasses always tucked into her cardigan. She smiled nervously, explaining to Ethan that she used to fear dogs after a childhood incident, but that Shadow's story had changed something in her. "I figured if he could forgive people," she said softly, "maybe I could try too." Meanwhile, Ethan and Shadow fell into a new rhythm. They were no longer just a man and a dog. They were a team. Morning patrols, community visits, occasional school talks where kids asked if Shadow could do tricks. He couldn't really, but he tried. At night, they'd return home, where Shadow had his own bed beside the fireplace, and Ethan, though he never said it out loud, felt the house no longer echoed the same. On one particularly rainy evening, as they walked back from a late check-in at the shelter, Ethan paused outside his porch. Shadow stopped beside him. "You know," Ethan said, voice low, "I thought I was saving you that day." Shadow looked up at him. "But turns out you saved me too." No response. Just a soft bump of a wet nose against his hand, and Ethan knew the feeling was mutual. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive with trumpet sounds or shining lights. They come on four legs, covered in dust and scars, with eyes that have seen both cruelty and hope. Shadow wasn't just a rescued dog, he became a symbol of redemption, loyalty, and second chances. Through his courage and devotion, an entire town was reminded that no creature is too broken to be loved, and no soul is beyond healing. In our daily lives, we often overlook the quiet blessings: a loyal companion, a warm home, a moment of unexpected kindness. But these are the very things that carry God's grace. Just like Shadow, we are all called to protect, to love, and to restore what was lost. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment with Amen if you believe that every life, human or animal, is sacred and deserves love. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that warm the soul. May God bless everyone watching this. And may we all be more like Shadow, brave, faithful, and full of grace.